The transition program TAPS really doesn't always quite cut it for most people in terms of helping them with their career transition. I had spent some time in staffing trying to hire veterans for long-term temp positions and kept coming across these resumes that really weren't very good and really didn't say a whole lot. And I live in the Los Angeles area, and there's a huge issue with homelessness among veterans. And on a personal level, that really pisses me off. You know, these people have served our country and they're living on the streets. And like, what the heck? Um, and so I started doing some volunteer work, reviewing resumes, no big deal, nothing major. And then when I gotten laid off my recruiting position, I decided I'd go back to school, get that master's, and work in higher ed. Life being what it was, I realized I needed something a little bit more flexible than having to be near a school. And so I started this business, which, life is funny. Ended up going on the back burner up until January of this year. And I'm able to help with anything related to that career transition from military service to civilian employment because it is a big adjustment. Language is different, culture is different. Interviewing is something that's completely new for most people. You have to interview for a promotion, but it's not at all the same thing. And so teaching those skills, helping people to figure out what's right for them in terms of company and culture and that kind of thing. Because most people don't know to look for red flags and what's a green flag. And, then they end up in really awful work environments and they think it's them and it's not. They're just missing the red flags. So I'm able to help people navigate all of that. So that's really what I do.
Wow, that's amazing.
Mm, that is
Thank you.
amazing. Mm. Well, so out of your work, and now what are your challenges? And let's spell the fire.
W-
Let's spell the fire around that.
yeah. So I do everything over Zoom. This business was originally built for flexibility. In pre-COVID times, I was previously engaged to an active duty Marine, and he was stationed in the middle of nowhere. So everything I do is over Zoom, which makes it really easy for my clients because it doesn't matter where they are,
Right.
as long as their intention is to work in the United States. I worked with an airman who was about to separate and was still, overseas. I believe he was somewhere in the like Arab world. And so I was able to help him with his resume. We found a time that worked. Um, although I think it was like 3 a.m. His time. And it's really about meeting the client where they are. There are some folks who are like, oh, I got the resume thing down, and they do. But I have no idea how to interview. And so I like to meet with clients initially for like a quick 15 minutes, figure out what their challenges are, what they're struggling with, where they need support, and then really either suggest a service or two or put together a custom package for them. Because I don't want someone to buy a service they don't need. That's really unethical, in my opinion, to sell somebody something they don't need. And so it's about just like seeing what their needs are and meeting those needs because everyone is different. One thing I like to do is really challenge people. I've noticed a lot of people are like, oh, well, I did this in the military, so I'm going to do this in the civilian world. You see a lot of infantry guys who are like, I'm going to be cop. And I'm like, wait, hold on. Why? Is it because you really think you're going to enjoy being a cop or because you think that's the only skill you have? Um, because it's very different, first of all, to go from infantry to being a police officer. An MP is much more closely aligned with a civilian law enforcement officer. But why do you want to do that? Is it something that's really interesting to you, or do you feel like you have to? And really challenging people to not pigeonhole themselves if they have other interests.
Mm. Well, you bring such a great resource to our community. You really do. I mean, and it's
Thank you.
important when it's kind of like you know, when a service person is separating from the military, and now they have to decide. what they are going to drive themselves to do. And it's kind of like, and it is like that, a child or a kid growing up, every kid or child wants to be a police officer, and which is important work, and it's a service work. But I mean, and just because that's your area of skill set, and it's kind of like at 18 years old, you're asking a high school graduate what they want to do with the rest of their lives. It's one of the biggest decisions that they'll have to answer, but they don't know what to do with that.
I'm gonna challenge that though. And here's why. I'm on my third career.
Uh-huh,
Gone are the days where someone's like, I'm gonna do something and I'm gonna do that for the next 50 years.
uh-huh.
That went that's it's really the silent generation. And some of the boomers, but not all. I started out my career as a litigation paralegal. I was a receptionist at a law firm and I was getting my paralegal certificate at night and I hated it. And then I went into recruiting and here we are now, working in career counseling. And I could never have guessed that I would end up here. Um, so that's the other piece of it is it's very common, not just among service members, but among civilians as well. I have to pick a field and I have to stick to it for the rest of my working life. And that's just not true. You can always change your field. You can always go back to school. You can always get another degree. You can always make a change. Um, and I always remind people of that because everyone assumes it's this major decision, and to a degree it is, right? You have to get up and go to this job every day. And if you hate it, life sucks, right? I think we've all had that job where we're like, oh, I have to go in, get the Sunday scaries, as they call it now, right? Um, but you're not truly stuck there. You can always make a change. You can always switch fields, no matter your age, no matter your point in your career.
You make a good point there. What's outstanding though is the one thing that it's kind of like in the movie Matrix, where they asked you to download training on how to fly a helicopter. Now, and that's amazing because we are always going to be training. You're always going to be training for something. And it's important to realize what you can train for and what you can become.
Yeah.
And when you're bridging the gap between what you did, what you know, and what you will become and what you come to know, it's a big deal. It's a really big deal, and how to step into that.
Yeah. And a lot of skills are transferable. One of the most common things I hear from people coming out of military service, they're like, oh, well, I don't know how to do anything besides this. Well, hold on, let's look at what this is, right? Leadership, attention to detail, um, you know, just the ability to manage stress. I worked with somebody while I was in grad school who's I guess more of a friend than a client, but like he was the guy who was in charge of the people who were running the drones. And I was like, you made life or death decisions. Are you gonna go into a corporate environment and be stressed out? And he's like, no, not at all. And I was like, well, okay, if there's a skill. And people like to downplay their experience a lot and they pretend that there aren't skills that are very much there. And it's super important to think about, okay, what's what's this skill and how do I use it in a different context? Because you're going to have to do that in an interview setting anyway.
Amazing, Leora. I really want to thank you for that insight. And so, I mean, I also want to encourage you because when you're sitting there talking to a service person who's moving away from what they did now, and you have to explore with them what they could do and what their skill sets allow them the strength and the power to be able to do. And now you're gonna be now you talk about doing it for service people, just the average person. Okay, look at where you've come and what you've accomplished. Because life is about our accomplishments and what we were able to do, and then what and how we will look forward into what we can be accomplished or encouraged to accomplish. And yeah, and we have to explore. I mean, if we're ever gonna, how you sit back, you said, I did that, I did that.
Yeah.
Man, You know what enormous power that represents? I did that. I was able to do that. I came across and overcame these circumstances to be able to, bam, done. You know, when like, and it's real. Stamp an issue, done. And and when you can do it with some power, you can do it with some power. See, and we don't know that. Okay, don't sit back and be compelled or overwhelmed by what you're facing. You know, look forward to where you want to really be and what you want to conquer. What you want to, and being the power now, it's kind of like, if somebody were, here's an example. A professor or teacher, and they look back and they look at all the students that they've had an influence over, and then you think about all your own professors and what kind of influence they've had over your life. And when you think, who is the best professor that I remember having, and that power or perception has tremendous influence because they were able to get you from point A to B. And now I'll give you a perfect example. Now I had my own challenges in college, but I had a professor who was a great friends with Martin Luther King Jr. Great friends with him. In fact, they went to undergraduate together, Virginia Union, and they always remained friends. But this professor, he would look at me and said, "What are you doing? Where are you going?" And then he would say to me, he said, "Don't go to college and don't go to college. If you're going to go to college, go to college." And so, and his consistent and persistent discussions with me made me to decide, ooh, let me, let me straighten my collar up. Let me get my act together, man, because he's for real. I mean, he's for real. I mean, you only get one life, and you got to do with it what you have to be able to do with it. And so you'll never know the people that you come into contact with that have that perception about you, and how far that will go. So I just want to encourage you all that let's take the time and step into it. Step into it and be the power and influence you have the capacity to be.
Thank you for
Thank you
watching.
so much, Leora, for that.
Does anyone have a question
Yeah.
for Leona? All right. You're watching Discover Brightside. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Thank you for